Hello everyone, my name is Diego,
Hi, and I'm Conchita.
and we're very excited to announce that we are starting or attempting to start a new video series talking about a variety of disability topics that are important to us.
And we recognize that we have very specific lived experiences based on disability and our privileges and our marginalizations. And so we hope to bring in other individuals with disabilities that can share from their experiences that we cannot.
Right. And that's why it's also important for this to be a conversation, and we want people to engage in the comments below. I was born with cerebral palsy. I was born 6 months and a half into my mom's pregnancy, and I was actually born in the States. My parents are originally from Mexico, but they were shopping for baby stuff.
It always comes down to shopping.
Right. And a trip that was supposed to be 3 days turned into 3 months because I was born premature. And so it was actually a shocker for my parents because they were obviously in a new country. They didn't know the laws and regulations around it. And my dad actually was freaked out about how they were going to pay for stuff. My mom actually always says that that's how my dad lost all his hair. I was born in the U.S., but then when we moved back to Mexico, my brother was born 10 months and a half later. I think my parents missed each other a little too much there. And so I always grew up with a brother that did not have a disability, and I thought that it was a really interesting dynamic and a really interesting experience having somebody not have a disability and somebody that did. I think that my parents handled it really well in that the same expectations that they had for my brother to go to school, to be independent, they had for me. And I think that led me to live the very independent life. So that was sort of my experience growing up as a person with a disability.
Wow. Okay. My story began similar to Diego's. I was actually born in Mexico. And when I was about 4 or 5 years old, my family decided to come check out what the U.S. was all about. So we came over, and my mom quickly realized that the services that were available to myself and to my brother, we both have a disability, we're both legally blind, that those services were not going to be available in Mexico. And so my parents made the very difficult decision of leaving everything behind and staying in the United States. So we became undocumented. And so that in itself has a lot of different kind of issues that come along with it, and kind of having a disability and being undocumented. I ended up going through public school, and so I did have a IEP plan that gives all students in the United States access to services.
Do you want to explain what an IEP is for people that may not know?
Yeah, and so an IEP plan is called an Individualized Educational Program, and it makes sure that as a child with a disability, you are able to access the education that every student has. So it provides you with technology, services, support inside and outside of the classroom. So unfortunately, it's not a great system. And so I believe that I did not receive great services when I was in school. So I didn't learn how to be independent. I think one of the things Diego was talking about in your experience was how your parents kind of held the same expectations for you as they did your siblings.
Right.
So we're 5 siblings, and my parents definitely didn't have the same expectations.
What?
Like, I definitely was like, yeah, I don't want to sweep today. Mom's like, oh, she can't see. It's okay. She don't have to sweep. And my brothers would get super upset. They'd be like, she's just making this up. And like, part of me was like, no, I can't see it. But there was never the expectation that I ever had to do it.
Right.
And so I definitely grew up a little kind of in that different sense where I was not held to the same expectations.
Right. I think it's important for us to talk about like how we came to terms with our own disability identity.
Exactly. Right? And so I had no identity as a person with a disability at all. I didn't know people with disabilities. I saw people with disabilities as this other group, and I had a very ableist idea of what a person with a disability was, and I did not want to identify as that.
I think it's also important to recognize that you could pass.
Exactly. I could pass. So now I use a cane and I use a lot of resources, but before I did not.
Right.
And so only like my family knew or close friends knew. When I was actually in college, I didn't tell people. Right. And so one time my friend is like, how high are you? And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he's like, you know, you're always squinting and light bothers you and you don't always say hi to us because you're like zoomed out. And I'm like, oh my God, you think I'm high? I'm just blind. And so kind of because I didn't tell people, then they assumed other things.
When I go out to a bar and stuff, people always think that I'm wasted.
I can see that. Yeah.
I feel the pain.
So what I finally I was not independent at all. Like people see me now and they're like, oh, you must have always been like this, and I wasn't. I never went anywhere by myself. I graduated college and I was 22 years old, and I had never been anywhere by myself. I always went with somebody else, which was like I always had this fear that I was gonna get lost somewhere. So I was like, don't leave me, you know. I'd go to the grocery store and like, you can't be out of my sight. So I finally, to make a long story short, I finally learned about, you know, disability and about independence.
But I think beyond independence, what you and I have talked about several times is like this idea of disability pride and how we became proud of the identity, right? And I think that your being around other people who are blind and who are proud of that identity help your disability pride. And in the same way that it did to me, like I grew up being very independent, you know, my brother and I, we always had the same expectations, but I was never exposed to a teacher with a disability, or I was never exposed to other students with disabilities who had also high expectations of their own development. It wasn't until the US I came for college that I started to see that there were other people like me, that there were other people that used wheelchairs and other people that had trouble walking, and that they embraced their disability and saw their disability as something valuable. And once we started to have that conversation, I realized, oh, maybe it's not such a bad thing that I use a wheelchair sometimes to...
And I think that's the most valuable thing. I always say, that's great that you're providing good services and that you're teaching students with disabilities, especially like how to be independent and daily living skills. Those things are great. But if they are not followed along with a sense of disability pride, they mean nothing.
Right.
So it's kind of like teaching, like I'm Mexican and we're both Mexican.
Right.
And so I have a lot of pride in being Mexican. But if I only learned like these are traditions and these are holidays and this is the without having a sense of pride, it means nothing. And so I feel that in the same way, I was able to embrace disability because I was able to correlate it with culture, and it is culture. We are a community, you know, and so I think that's my biggest concern about special education, that we are not giving children the ability to understand disability pride and interact with disabled adults.
Right. I agree. Awesome. Well, I think this is a conversation to start a discussion around disability pride, disability identity, and sort of what does the different journey of people has been. So we'll leave it there.
And we'd love to hear from you about your experiences.
Yes.
So are your experiences similar to ours?
Right.
Do you have different experiences? Leave it in the comments. We'd love to hear what y'all have to say.
Yes. And next week we'll be talking about family dynamics and Mother's Day. So make sure to stay tuned for that. Ciao.
Bye.